Hello everyone, welcome to our macroeconomics lecture. Today we're going to be discussing one of the most crucial aspects of any economy, the labor market and unemployment. Understanding how the labor market functions and what factors influence employment and wages is key to analyzing economic performance and policy decisions. Over the course of this lecture, we'll explore the key components of the labor market, the various types of unemployment, and important economic theories that explain employment trends. We'll also examine real-world examples and case studies to make these topics more tangible and engaging. Before we dive into the details, let's take a step back and consider why the labor market is such a fundamental part of macroeconomics. The labor market is where businesses and workers come together. It determines how many people have jobs, how much they paid, and what kind of work they do. At the same time, unemployment remains the major concern for economists and policymakers, as it reflects the efficiency of the resource allocation in an economy. In today's session, we'll address the key questions such as what drives the supply and demand for labor, what causes unemployment and what are its different types, how do government policies influence employment levels. Let's start with astonishing fact. Did you know that the highest recorded unemployment rate in modern history occurred in North Macedonia in the early 1990s? At its peak, unemployment reached the staggering 97%. This extreme case occurred due to the collapse of the Yugoslav economy and the difficult transition from the socialist system to market economy. Many state-owned enterprises shut down and millions of workers lost their jobs overnight. This example highlights the importance of the well-functioning labor market. Economic transitions, whether due to political changes, financial crisis, and technological advancements, have profound effects on employment levels. Later in this lecture, we'll see how different types of unemployment, such as structural and cyclical unemployment, help us make sense of such drastic shifts. So let's start with the basic understanding of unemployment and labor markets. The labor market is the backbone of any economy because it directly influences economic growth and income distribution and overall societal well-being. Just like in other market, the price here, the wage rate, is determined by the interaction between supply and demand. Labor supply represents the number of hours people are willing to work at a given wage rate. It is influenced by the factors such as population size, cultural attitudes, and alternative income sources. Labor demand reflects how many workers businesses are willing to hire at a certain wage rate. This depends on the factors such as worker productivity, the price of goods and services, and advancement in technology. On the supply side, individuals make decisions based on the wages and alternative employment opportunities. If wage increases, more people will be willing to work extra hours or enter the labor force. Conversely, if wage is low, some individuals may choose alternative options such as further education or informal work. On the demand side, businesses determine how many workers they need based on the several factors. Productivity: the more productive the worker is, the more valuable they become to an employer. Technology: automation can replace certain jobs, reducing demand for labor. In some industries, cost of production: when businesses face lower costs, they may expand and hire more workers. Next, we'll explore how labor market reaches an equilibrium and what happens when external forces disrupt it. Now that we understand labor supply and demand, let's take a closer look at how wages are determined in competitive labor market. Just like in any other market, wages are determined by the interaction between labor supply and labor demand. The point where these two curves intersect is called the equilibrium wage rate. This is wage at which the number of workers that employers want to hire equal the number of workers willing to work. Just like in every equilibrium scenario from the introduction to economics discipline. If wages are above the equilibrium, there will be the surplus of labor. If wages are below the equilibrium, there will be the shortage of labor, too few workers available for the jobs offered. This mechanism explains why wage tends to stabilize at a certain level, but external factors like government regulations, unions, and economic shocks can shift these curves, as we'll see in the next slides. So the question arises, what happens when more people are willing to work at the same wage level? This leads to a shift in the labor supply curve to the right. This can happen for several reasons: demographic changes. If a country experiences high population growth or influx of immigrants, the number of available workers increases. Cultural and societal factors. If societal attitudes to work change, for example, if more women or older individuals join the workforce, the labor supply expands. Government policies. Policies like reduced welfare benefits or lower taxes or wages may encourage more people to work. As the labor supply increases, the equilibrium wage rate falls, assuming labor demand remains constant. This is because more workers are competing for the same number of jobs, giving the employers greater bargaining power. Now let's examine the opposite case when the labor productivity increases. Higher productivity means that workers can produce more output per hour, making them more valuable to employers. This shifts the labor demand curve to the right, leading to both higher wages and more employment. What drives labor productivity? Technological advancement, the introduction of automation, AI, or improved machinery allows workers to produce more in the same amount of time. Better education and skills. A highly skilled workforce contributes more to production, increasing demand for their labor. Improved infrastructure, efficient transportation, communication, and digital network help workers and firms operate more effectively. As demand for labor increases, wages rise and unemployment falls, leading to overall economic growth. However, this isn't always positive. Technological advancement can also eliminate some jobs, especially those requiring low skills. We'll discuss this issue further when we talk about the structural unemployment. Another factor influencing wages is the role of trade unions. Trade unions negotiate wages and working conditions on behalf of workers. When unions successfully bargain for higher wages, they push wages above the equilibrium level. While these benefits unionize workers by increasing their income, it can also have unintended consequences. Increased unemployment. At higher wages, firms may not be able to afford as many workers, leading to job losses. Higher production costs. Businesses facing higher wage bills may pass on their costs to consumers, leading to inflation. Reduced competitiveness. If labor costs rise too much, firms may move production to other countries where wages are lower. The effect of unions depends on industry and overall economic conditions. In some cases, they protect workers from exploitation, while in others, they contribute to inefficiencies and job losses. Government often intervene in labor market by setting the minimum wage to protect workers from extremely low pay. But what happens when the minimum wage is set above the equilibrium wage? This results in binding price floor, meaning that the firms are legally required to pay workers a wage higher than what the market would naturally set. Higher wages can improve living standards and reduce income inequality, which is definitely the positive effect. Workers earn more, which can increase overall spending in the economy, while the negative effect is lying in the spectrum of the businesses, which cannot afford to pay higher wages, which may lead to the fact that they will reduce hiring, leading to higher unemployment among the low-skilled workers. A classic example is seen in many countries where minimum wage laws have led to job cuts in industries with low-skilled workers. The key challenge for policymakers is to find the balance between the workers earn a fair wage without causing widespread job losses. Now let's examine an important concept in labor economics: how individuals decide how many hours to work. This decision is influenced by two opposing forces: the substitution effect and the income effect. Let's break them down one by one. When wages rise, the opportunity cost of leisure increases. In simple terms, every hour spent relaxing instead of working now costs more money in lost wages. As a result, people choose to work more hours because the financial reward for working has increased. The income effect at the same time means that higher wages mean that individuals earn more income for the same amount of work. Since they can now maintain their desired standard of living while working fewer hours. Some people may choose to work less and enjoy more leisure time. Which effect dominates? At a low wages level, the substitution effect tends to dominate. People work more as wage rises. At a very high wage, the income effect becomes stronger. People value their free time more and may reduce their working hours. This is why sometimes observe high-income professionals reducing their working hours or retiring early. Understanding these effects helps explain why different workers respond differently to wage increase. Now let's visualize these effects with a labor supply curve. In most markets, we expect the supply curve to slope upward, meaning that the price of wages increase, more of good or labor is supplied. However, the individual labor supply curve is unique because it can bend backward at high wage levels. The upward slope section, this part, at low wages, the substitution effect dominates. When wages rise, people work more because the reward for working is higher. The backward bending section means that at higher wage levels, the income effect dominates. Workers begin to value their leisure more and may reduce their working hours, leading to a backward bend in the labor supply curve. For example, a factory worker earning minimum wage may take an extra shift when wages increase. A wealthy entrepreneur may work fewer hours as their earnings grow, choosing to spend more time on hobbies or family. This concept is crucial for policymakers because it shows that increasing wages does not always lead to increased labor supply. In fact, raising wages too much in some professions may reduce the number of hours worked rather than increasing it. Now that we have explored the labor market, let's shift our focus to unemployment, one of the key indicators of economic performance. What is unemployment? Unemployment refers to the share of the labor force that is willing and able to work but cannot find a job. It is a crucial concern in macroeconomics because it represents underutilized human resources. But why does it matter? Economic impact. High unemployment means fewer people are earning wages, leading to lower consumption and weaker economic growth. Social impacts. Long-term unemployment can lead to poverty, social unrest, and declining mental health among the affected workers. Government response. Policymakers use unemployment data to design economic policies, such as fiscal stimulus or job creation programs. A common misconception is that unemployment should always be zero. No, guys. In reality, some level of unemployment is natural and even necessary. We'll explore different types of unemployment later in this lecture. So the question arises, what causes unemployment? There are several key factors that can lead to job losses or difficulty in finding employment. Some people choose to be unemployed, for example, because workers quitting their jobs to look for better opportunities, or recent graduates searching for their first job, which states for voluntary decisions to leave job or voluntary unemployment. They can be the mismatch between the skills and job market needs. This happens when workers' skills do not match the needs of employers. For example, advances in technology may make certain jobs obsolete, such as factory workers replaced by automation. Economic downturns, for example, recessions, usually lead to the cutting of the cost by the laying off workers, which reduces job opportunities. During the 2008 global financial crisis, millions lost their jobs as companies faced reduced consumer demand. There can be also the shifts in consumer demand. When consumer preferences change, some industries shrink while others expand. The rise of online shopping has reduced jobs in traditional retail stores while increasing demand for workers in e-commerce and logistics. Now that we understand the cause of unemployment, let's talk about how we measure it. The unemployment rate is a key economic indicator that shows the percentage of the labor force which is actively seeking but unable to find a job. It helps economists and policymakers evaluate the health of economy. How is it calculated? The formula is pretty simple. We should find the number of unemployed and divide it by the number of the people who belong to the category of the labor force and then multiply the received value by 100 in order to receive the percentage values. Unemployment people are the people who are actively looking for a job but unable to find one. So attempt really matters. The labor force consists of the both unemployed and unemployment individuals, basically everyone who is either working or actively seeking work. For example, if economy has 50,000 employed people and the total labor force is 650,000 people, then the unemployment rate is roughly 7.68%. So here we have the specific infographic describing the people who belong to the labor force and those who do not. First of all, we have to find the people belonging to the working age population. These are the people within the 16 to 64 year age gap. The labor force are the ones who are employed or are the unemployed. So people who work part-time or full-time, it doesn't matter, they really belong to the labor force. So if you work 4 hours a day officially, congratulations, you are employed person. Those who are not in labor force may include the people who do not look for the job because of the specific reasons, those who receive their higher education, or the people who are in prisons, the inmates, or those people who by their own will decided to take care of the small infants, those people who are retired within the working age population. I mean those people who are retiring within their 40s or 50s, for example, the officers, the military officers, or those who previously worked in the police, and some people due to specific reasons who are permanently unable to work. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we have the following scenario, just an example. The number of people who are employed in this particular country is 12.6 million people. The number of those who are unemployed is 0.7 million people. Then when we combine these volumes, we receive the labor force value of 13.3 million people. The common mistake is that usually people divide the number of unemployed by the number of employed. No, it's a mistake. So we have to divide the number of those who are unemployed by the number of those who belong to the labor force overall. So 0.7 million people divided by 13.3 million key people, multiply this volume by 100 and receive the value of 5.3%. So the unemployment rate in this particular scenario is 5.3%. Now let's introduce another key labor market indicator, the labor force participation rate, LFPR. The labor force participation rate measures the proportion of the working age population that is actively engaged in the labor market, either by working or by actively seeking work. It helps us understand how many people are participating in the economy and contributing to production. The formula is pretty simple. We have to determine the number of those who belong to the labor force and divide it by the volume of those who belong to the working age population. In average, these are the people within the 16 up to 64 year age gap. Talking about the Kazakhstan, the labor force is usually calculated among the working age population, which is 16 up to 61 among females and 16 up to 63 among the men. uh, why it matters. Sometimes a falling unemployment rate can be misleading. If the labor force participation rate is also declining, it might not mean that the more people are finding jobs. It could just mean that few people are looking for work. This can happen when the individuals give up searching for jobs altogether due to discouragement or other personal factors. What does a higher labor force participation rate indicate? A high LFPR suggests that more people are actively engaged in the economy, contributing to productivity and growth. It typically signals a healthy labor market with more employment opportunities. What does a low labor force participation rate indicate? A low LFPR could mean that many people are out of the workforce, which might slow down economic growth. It could be due to an aging population, rising student enrollment, or discouraged workers who have stopped job hunting. For example, there is a specific case in many developed countries regarding declining labor force participation rate over the past few decades due to aging population and early retirements. This presents a challenge because fewer workers are contributing to economic output while more retirees depend on social benefits. So, for example, in this particular scenario, we have the labor force participation rate of 66.5%. What does it mean? 66.5% of those who belong to the working age population within a specific country are either working or actively trying to find the job. The several key factors may influence the labor force participation rate. First of all, demographic factors. Aging population reduce labor force participation rate as more people retire. Strong economic growth usually leads to higher labor force participation rates as more jobs opportunities attract people into the workforce. In some countries, gender roles and societal expectations influence those who participate in the labor market, and unemployment benefits can either encourage or discourage job seeking depending on how they are structured. Okay, talking about the Kazakhstan scenario, unemployment rate among the whole people which belong to the labor force is 4.7%. There is absolutely no difference among the urban and rural areas, but there is a considerable difference between the men and women. In other words, women are more likely to be unemployed compared to men. According to the data provided by the National Bureau of Statistics, the Kazakhstan labor force numbers 9.6 million people. Those who are employed accounts for 9.1 million people. The employment rate in Kazakhstan is 95.3%. What does it mean? 95.3% of those who belong to the labor force are employed. The unemployed population is 451,000 people, which stands for 4.7% of the labor force. This is data about the labor force participation rate in Kazakhstan. Interestingly, please pay attention to this line. The in average, talking about the whole population of Kazakhstan, labor force participation rate is about 65%, while among the men it's about 70%, while among men in 10% lower. What does it mean? Women are less likely to be within the labor force compared to men. Presumably, it's because of the cultural attitudes about the men and women. So women are more likely to take care of the kids when they are infants. If you are interested, you can click on the link below and access the information about the labor force participation rate regarding the whole world. You'll be surprised that in Afghanistan, labor force participation rate is one of the lowest. Try to guess why. Okay, so here we have the data about the specific country where the total working age population is 1 million. The number of those who are employed is 600,000. The number of those who are unemployed is 50,000. 1,000 people. Your task is to determine the labor force, which in this case is 650,000 people. Unemployment rate in this particular scenario is 7.69%, and the labor force participation rate is 65. So since it's a video lecture, I'm already providing you with the answers. So utilizing these data, try to determine the same volumes. In this case, I'm talking about the working age population. Calculate the people who are not part of the labor force. Bum. And those who belong to the labor force. And try to find the number of those who are unemployed. And as a result, try to calculate the labor force participation rate. Add unemployment rate too. Okay, we have come to the slides with information about the types of unemployment. Presumably you have already heard about these types of unemployment previously with the introduction to economics course. In this scenario, in this particular case, we're going to be delving into details of each of the unemployment type. Frictional unemployment happens when workers are temporarily between jobs. It includes people who are searching for their first job after graduating, transitioning from one job to another, or relocating to a different city or country and looking for employment. For example, the software engineer quits her current job to find a better paying position or move to a different city. During the job search, she is frictionally unemployed. The question is frictional unemployment bad? Answer is no. It's actually a sign of a healthy economy. It means people have the flexibility to switch jobs, look for better opportunities, and improve their careers. Since this type of unemployment is temporary, it's not a major concern for economic policymakers. Next, we have structural unemployment, which is more serious than frictional unemployment. It occurs when workers' skills do not match the skills needed in the labor market. Usually, it happens due to technological advances, for example, automation and AI replacing traditional jobs, changes in consumer demands, some industries decline while others grow, or globalization, companies moving jobs to countries with lower labor costs. As more people shop online, physical retail stores close, leading to job losses among the retail workers. These workers must retrain and acquire new skills to find jobs in logistics or e-commerce. How can we reduce structural unemployment? First of all, invest in education and job retraining programs or encouraging workers to move to regions with better job opportunities. Since structural unemployment can last a long time, it requires policy interventions to help workers transition into new industries, and it can be a long term, which poses specific challenges to economy in general. Now let's discuss cyclical unemployment, which is directly tied to business cycle. It arises during economic recessions and falls during periods of economic expansion. When demand for goods and services declines, businesses reduce production and lay off workers. For example, during the 2008 global financial crisis, many businesses shut down and unemployment rates soared worldwide. Conversely, during economic booms, unemployment tends to decrease as firms hire more workers. Government responds to cyclical unemployment utilizing expansionary fiscal and expansionary monetary policy. Cyclical unemployment is often temporary, but it can have long-term effects if workers remain unemployed for extended periods. Type of unemployment we'll discuss is seasonal. Seasonal unemployment happens when jobs are only available during certain times of the year. This occurs in industry that depend on weather, tourism, or specific seasonal activities like agriculture, tourism industry, and retail, where holiday shopping season creates temporary jobs in stores which disappear after the holidays. How can government and business address seasonal unemployment? Maybe encourage seasonal workers to develop alternative skills for year-round employment. Typically, seasonal unemployment does not pose significant and serious challenges to the economy because it's predictable and usually short-term. Now you can see the summary of the key differences between these four types of unemployment, an example contributing to each of these definitions. To better understand unemployment in practice, let's look at the real-world data from the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS. The BLS regularly collects and publishes unemployment statistics, helping policymakers, businesses, and researchers track labor market trends. So what does this data tell us? First of all, trends over time, how unemployment rates have changed during recessions and expansions, differences in unemployment rates by age, gender and education, and race, and also industry-specific unemployment data. Some sectors experience higher job losses than others, especially during economic crisis. So why is this data important? First of all, government and central banks use unemployment statistics to guide economic policies. So here we have unemployment rates by demographic groups in 1985 and 2018. So what kind of trend can you experience? So starting from the 1985 to 2018, the unemployment rate have decreased significantly in more than 2 times. But interestingly, there was significantly higher rate of unemployment among the African Americans in 1985. In other words, uh, the African American, in other words, the Black Americans experienced a significantly higher unemployment rate in 1985. But over time, this value has decreased dramatically in more than 3 times. Also, one of the most surprising data we can observe right here is an average duration of unemployment over this period, over this 47-year period. Interestingly, what kind of trend can you observe? Obviously, over time, over these 47-year periods, the average duration of unemployment has increased dramatically. For instance, in 1970, an average duration of unemployment was roughly 9 weeks. In this case, in 2017, it was 25 weeks. So, over this period of time, the people who are unemployed are more unemployed in terms of the weeks they are unemployed. Now that we understand different types of unemployment, let's explore one of the most important relationships in macroeconomics, the connection between unemployment and inflation. At the first glance, these two indicators might seem unrelated. One measures joblessness, while the other tracks the price level. However, economic data show that changes in unemployment often influence inflation and vice versa. The Phillips curve was first introduced by economist A. W. Phillips in 1858. The Phillips discovered that when unemployment was low, wages tend to rise. This has been observed within the data over the period from 1861 to 1957. In other words, he decided that there is an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. So how did this mechanism work? Low unemployment leads to more competition for workers. As a result, the wages rise, businesses increase prices, the country is experiencing the high inflation. When the employment is high, the country is facing less competition for workers, wages stagnate or even fall, so the companies bear the less spendings. As a result, the inflation tends to decrease. During 1960s, many countries experienced this trade-off. When governments pursued policies to lower unemployment, inflation tended to rise. When they tried to reduce inflation, unemployment increased. But the question arises, does the Phillips curve always work? Or does it happen all the time? Here we see the real historical data from 1861 up to 1913, where there is an inverse relationship between inflation and employment in the United Kingdom. So what does this graph tell us? When employment was low, inflation increased. When unemployment was high, inflation decreased. These confirm the Phillips curve hypothesis, at least during this historical period. However, as economies develop and new economic shocks emerge, this relationship between inflation and employment became more complex. So let's analyze the logic behind the Phillips curve in more detail. So what does the low unemployment tend to cause inflation? When unemployment is low, businesses must compete for workers. To attract employees, they raise wages. Higher wages increase workers' purchasing power, leading to greater demand for goods and services. As a result, the businesses respond to this by raising prices. The country is experiencing inflation. Imagine a boom economy where almost everyone has a job. Businesses want to expand, but they struggle to find workers. To fill positions, they offer higher salaries. These higher wages mean consumers spend more, pushing prices up. This mechanism explains why central banks closely monitor unemployment levels when setting monetary policy. If inflation rises too much, they may increase interest rates to slow down economic activity and prevent overheating. In response to new economic realities, the Phillips curve was modified to include inflation expectations, and that's how it looks like today. This version of the equation acknowledges that inflation is influenced not just by unemployment, but also by people's expectations and external shocks. For example, if workers expect inflation to rise to be 5% next year, they will demand high wages, leading firms to raise prices in advance, causing inflation and to materialize even without changes in unemployment. This is why central banks work to control an inflation expectation through interest rate policies and public communications. Now let's take a deeper look at how inflation and unemployment interact in the long run. These diagrams represent the long-run Phillips curve, or LRPC, which challenges the idea that there is a stable trade-off between inflation and unemployment. What does this curve tell us? Unlike the short-run Phillips curve, which suggests that all unemployment leads to high inflation in the long run, unemployment always returns to its natural rate regardless of the inflation level. Uh, when the Federal Reserve, for example, or any central bank increases the growth rate of the money supply, inflation rises. They shift the economy from point A with the low inflation to point B. From point A to point B with high inflation on the diagram. Initially, firms may increase hiring because they perceive higher demand due to increased money circulation. However, as workers and businesses adjust their expectations to higher inflation rate, any temporary drop in unemployment disappears. In other words, in long run, unemployment returns to natural rate even though inflation remains permanently high. One of the biggest challenges to the traditional Phillips curve occurred in the 1970s during the period of stagflation when both inflation and employment were high. What happened? Oil price shocks raised production costs, making goods more expensive. Businesses passed these costs to consumers, causing high inflation to rise. At the same time, economic output contracted, leading to higher unemployment. These went against the Phillips curve prediction that high unemployment should lead to low inflation. What did economists learn? Inflation is not just driven by unemployment but also by external supply shocks. People's expectations about the future inflation play a critical role, and governments must focus on long-term solutions rather than short-term trade-off. Now let's introduce an essential concept in macroeconomics, the natural level of unemployment, which is the level of unemployment that exists even in a healthy, well-functioning economy. It's an employment rate when the labor market is in long-run equilibrium, meaning the economy is operating at full capacity without overheating. Why does unemployment still exist in the strong economy? Even when the economy is booming, some unemployment always persists due to frictional unemployment and structural unemployment. Imagine an economy where firms are hiring and job opportunities are abundant. Even in this case, some workers will be between jobs, taking time to find a better fate. Some jobs will disappear due to technological progress requiring workers to retrain. So why is NRU important? If the unemployment falls below the NRU, inflation may rise due to increased demand for labor. According to the Phillips curve, if unemployment rises above NRU, it signals that the economy is in trouble, possibly in recession. The natural level of unemployment is composed of two main types of unemployment: frictional, which occurs when people are transitioning between the jobs, which is a short-term and considered a sign of a dynamic labor market; and structural unemployment, which occurs when workers' skills do not match available jobs, which is usually long-term and requires retraining and relocation. Why do these two types of unemployment form the NRU? Even in a growing economy, workers will always be changing jobs or adjusting to new industries. This is why NRU is never zero. A small level of unemployment is natural, even necessary for healthy, flexible labor markets. Now let's introduce Okun's law, an important empirical relationship between unemployment and economic output. What does Okun's law state? Okun's law suggests that when unemployment rises, GDP falls. This is because fewer people working means fewer goods and services being produced, reducing overall economic output. The intuition behind Okun's law lies as follows. If fewer people are employed, total production decreases. Businesses experience lower demand and slow down hiring. Low production leads to decline in GDP growth. Suppose an economy natural rate of unemployment is 4%. If unemployment increases to 6%, Okun's law predicts a significant drop in GDP. On average, 1% increase in employment leads to 2% decrease in GDP. Understanding this relationship is crucial because it helps policymakers predict how changes in unemployment predict economic. So, let's express Okun's law mathematically. The general formula looks like as follows. GDP gap equals minus C coefficient multiplied by the difference between the actual level of unemployment and the natural level of unemployment. Suppose the natural unemployment rate in the specific country is 4 and the actual unemployment rises to 6%. Utilizing the Okun's coefficient of 2, we can calculate that the GDP gap is 4%. What does it mean? This means that the economy is producing 4% less output than its potential. Usually, C in this particular scenario equals 2. It depends on the country, but usually it's 2. Just take it for granted. It's very similar in terms of the meaning to the price elasticity of demand coefficient. That we understand Okun's law mathematically, let's explore its implications for economic policy. Key insights from the Okun's law. Unemployment and GDP are closely linked. High unemployment reduces economic output, stimulating job growth, boosts economic growth. Policies that reduce unemployment can help GDP to recover faster. Economic recessions cause significant GDP losses. This is why governments intervene during downturns. Usually, the policymakers can utilize most monetary and fiscal policies, which are going to be the part of the later classes within the macroeconomics module. Okay, as I already told you, suppose the natural level of unemployment in a specific country is 4%. The natural level of unemployment is usually described by this sign, U with a star, and the actual unemployment rate is, which is U, rises to 6%. So the difference is 2%. With Okun's coefficient, which is usually described by the letter C, set to 2, the formula would look like this. So minus 2, because C is usually 2, multiplied by the difference between the actual and the natural level of unemployment, which gives us the value of minus 4. In this case, we can definitely interpret this result in the following way. Economy is producing 4% less than it could. So the economy is underutilizing resources. In other words, the country is in the recessionary gap. Typically, Okun's law is utilized by the policymakers to estimate how much potential economic output could be. Usually, they want to know the relationship between unemployment and GDP in order to make the right decisions about the fiscal and the monetary policies. And utilizing Okun's law, the economy can understand the dynamic of the business cycles and determine which phase the economy of the specific country is in right now. Now let's explore a critical macroeconomic concept known as a non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, NAIRU, NAIRU. NAIRU represents the level of unemployment at which inflation remains stable. It's an employment rate where the economy is in balance, neither overheating nor staggering. If unemployment falls below NAIRU, inflation accelerates due to rising wage and demand. If unemployment rises above NAIRU, inflation decreases as wage growth slows and spending declines. Why it's important? It helps policymakers determine how much unemployment is too low. Central banks utilize NAIRU to set interest rates and avoid inflationary spirals. So what does it mean? High minimum wages usually increase structural unemployment. As a result, the NAIRU is increasing. Generous benefits by the government may reduce the incentive to find a job, affecting the NAIRU. When unemployment is above NAIRU, inflation falls because there is less pressure on wages. When unemployment is below NAIRU, inflation rises because businesses compete for workers, pushing wages up. For example, suppose NAIRU is 5% and the actual employment rate is 3. This is low employment rate, and it means businesses struggle to find workers, leading to high wages. Workers spend more, increasing demand and pushing prices higher, leading to inflation. Workers expect the prices to rise, so they demand high wages. Businesses pass higher labor costs to consumers by raising prices. This creates a cycle of rising wages and inflation known as wage price spiral. One of the major factors determining the NAIRU is technological change. Usually rapid technological changes cause the skills gap, leading to high structural unemployment and increasing the NAIRU. Or demographic changes, age, gender, education, and its very composition of the workforce significantly affect the NAIRU. If the country is experiencing the young population, the younger workforce, presumably they're going to be experiencing the high frictional unemployment because there are so many graduates of the universities trying to find a job. and gentlemen, thank you for your participation. This is the end of this video lecture. If you have any kind of questions, don't hesitate to contact me utilizing these credentials provided on this slide. See you.